Andrew, I've
Yes.
seen on your IMDb that you worked on Family Guy and Happy Tree Friends. My question is it as fun working on those shows as they are to watch?
For the first season, I would say no. Second season, yes.
Why?
It's learning the character. Like, so for example, I animated Stewie. So for me to learn how to animate Stewie, it took a lot of work to be able to get into that workflow and be able to understand his mannerisms, how he acts, how he, again, once you've learned how that character moves, it's because you have to personify them yourself. So you have to become that character and how they act and how they move, how they talk, their little subtle nuances. That's always a big part of doing any kind of character animation.
And so once you'd learned Stewie and you were more comfortable with it, then
Totally.
it became fun.
Then it became fun because now you can have the most challenging scene. You can see what he would do because you would be feeling those emotions. You would be thinking those emotions and how he would act. And then just to be able to recreate that is the best. I think that's the best fun part of doing character animation is because it's acting. And then you're just recreating the performance on the screen.
When you first started and you were trying to learn Stewie, did you just had to learn Stewie and...
Yeah, so like obviously I would just watch older episodes or even like just talking to Seth and trying to get into the headspace of like what does that mean to be Stewie? Like how do you act as Stewie? What is that? And obviously like there was about 3 seasons at this point and that we already had reference. So we already had a good set idea of like who he was. Then the ethos kind of evolved over the last probably like after 5-6 seasons into the show. So obviously like again the characters and like how they moved and obviously the budgets too to be able to actually explore how much more movement we can give them.
Family Guy is a very exaggerated kind of animation. Does that make it more fun or is not really?
Family Guy actually is extremely strict. It's actually the contrary to that. So like that's the thing is like when you're watching the show, you're looking at like probably 90 to 95% of the show is just talking, voiceover, and subtle hand movements. But then you have like maybe 5 to 10% of the show where there's just crazy dramatic action. So again, when you're looking at the like ratios, you're constantly just like, again, throwing people to chocolate covered broccoli. Then you know that really hot, small hot part, but then you're actually giving them the bulk of the rest of it. So again, it's the contrast that you play with.
And what about Happy Tree Friends? Is that a similar vein?
That was like 90% crazy action, 10% nothing.
Oh, okay.
So it was just like, honestly, it was just like probably the most grueling animation I've ever actually be part of. It was so intense.
So tiring and stressful to work on?
Massively, and also having like getting like dreaming of like the most gruesome kind of like kill off sequences you can imagine. And then
Did you have to come up with them yourself?
We did, yeah.
Oh wow.
And then we had to like actually pitch that to the directors, like, what if we did this? Well, this would be really great, right?
Did you have any psychopaths on your animation team that came up with some really great ways?
Oh yeah, you could definitely see it's like, so what if we had like melt their feet as they're walking on the lava? It's like,
That was
why would you do that? Oh, there's some really brutal stuff. Like I just remember some of the sequences and I just like literally just like the grimace. You're like, oh no.
And what software package were you using for that?
We were using Flash at the time.
Really?
Oh wow.
Yeah. Well, see, that's the thing is like that was when Toon Boom was just becoming more of a thing than not. So like before Toon Boom, obviously like Flash animation like was the predominant like era, like from 1999 to about 2006. I still use Flash for 90% of the character animation stuff I need to do, just because the timeline is strong and it's just efficient. That's all I really need. If I'm gonna hand draw something, yeah, absolutely. And that's the thing is like realistically, when we were doing like Family Guy, we did like Family Guy, Happy Tree Friends, like again, just hardcore Flash assets. And again, it's just really easy to be able to build those out.
And do you still use Flash to this day, or have you moved on?
All the time.
All the time?
Yeah. Like my favorite version is Flash MX.
MX, but was it still Macromedia back then?
Yeah.
Oh wow.
Bit of nostalgia there.
It's actually abandonware now, so you can just download for free.
Really?
And have no legal
I didn't
consequences.
know that. And this might be false information, but I was under the impression that these days they farm out things like Family Guy to other countries. Is that the case?
Massively. They still do a lot of like the key animation, like the key poses.
The keyframes.
But then all the in-betweening is actually overseas.
Oh, okay. So there's people like you doing the keyframes on Family Guy, and then they'll send it to Korea, and they'll just fill in the
That's
the
right.
gaps.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So, well, it's good that there's some of the work still there.
Well, I mean, like at the end of the day, that's even what Disney used to do too. When you
really?
Don Bluth, that's exactly what they used to do. Like a lot of your keyframe animation, and then you'd have your secondary animations that do all the in-betweens. Or you have like people that are training, learning how to be able to animate like you, well then they become your in-betweener.
Andrew, you are Emmy nominated. Which project was it that you were nominated for?
It was actually a plugin, not a plugin, but a shader for making glass.
So you made a shader or a material for?
It was for calculating distance of reflectivity based off of a distance for glass. So obviously when you're doing glass, and this is back in the early 2000s, late 90s, and trying to calculate glass was very intense because obviously path tracing, that sucks. Especially when you're doing glass at any kind of distance. But if you could actually call that distance and do your glass based off of, let's say, a 5 meter radius instead of a 100 meter, boom, there you go. You save so much more render time because now you're only rendering and reflecting only what's within a certain environment.
Same reason these days they use the near distance fills and stuff.
There it is.
Yep.
And was that for, like, did you create a material inside a 3D application, or were you?
That's right. Yeah, it was within 3 Studio Max.
3ds Max, and was that for a project, or you just wanted to make a glass shader?
It was for a project I was doing. It's called for NSLC, so the Nova Scotia Liquor Commission, and it was like the first time I did it was for a broadcast, but then they came back to us, and this was back when it was like NTSC standard D1 NTSC, and that was 720 by 486. And then they came back, it was like, we want to be able to put this into like Cineplex. Like, we want this in movie theaters across Nova Scotia in the province. And then I was like, oh crap, I don't know how I'm gonna render this. Because like now you're looking at upscale for like from going from 720 486 to over 2000 at the time. So at that point to be able to render near 4K on this is like max 3.2. Good luck. We had and that's what we tried doing. We sent it to a render farm, but the cost was just going to be way too much.
Because of the glass specifically. So
Exactly.
you built your own shader.
The shader to be able to do the proximity.
Is it possible to monetize a shader, or like did you share it with all your colleagues? Or
I did sell it to Brazil, like Brazil rendering Splutterfish. They had a rendering system. Splutterfish had a rendering system that was just called Brazil, and that's what was like one of the big renderers back for Max back in the day.
And was that a team project, or you did it solo?
It was just me.
Wow. And did you get to go to like some big award ceremony and see all the?
I did, yeah.
And who were you up against for that?
Don't remember. This is back in 2003, 2004.
Things like the invention of ambient occlusion and things like that are often nominated for
That's
those
right,
things.
yeah.
So that's a pretty big thing. I thought it was just for like a TV show you'd worked on.
No, it got picked up just because like the render farm I took it to is like, hey, here's my shader. Let's plug it in and see how much time we could save off of this. And they're like, you made this? And I was like, yeah. And it's like, no, you didn't make this. You made this. And I was like, yeah.
Wow. And how much time did your shader save?
We had a render time of like, it was roughly 40, 50 minutes per frame. And at that point, it was just like, it was just going to be too expensive for the render farm at that point. So after we did the optimization, we went down from 40 minutes roughly down to about 10, 12 minutes.
Cool. Wow. Very
Check
impressive.
the description, ladies and gentlemen, for the rest of the end video. Subscribe.